All right, we are at the Junior League meeting doing the history of the Junior League on April 20th, 2010. And we have Joan Minnick, Grace Crary, Stana Eisman, and Mary Lantini talking about the history of the Junior League of Albany. Ladies?
I was asked to speak from 1917 to 1979. No, I don't remember what went on in 1917. The Junior League was started by Mary Harriman, a 19-year-old debutante in New York City in 1901. Albany became a part of the Junior League of America in 1917. The purpose of the league is to promote volunteerism and to improve the community through the effective action of trained volunteers. The purpose is exclusively educational and charitable. The first members were ladies with social position, money, and the desire to do charitable work. At the time, the members were not part of the workforce. In a balancing act between supplying volunteers to the community, a leadership, and money in establishing new community projects after extensive investigation, projects involving money have a cutoff date for financial assistance. In reviewing the projects established and supported by the League from 1917 to 1931, most of the projects involved the medical field, including the following. They furnished a laboratory at the Home for Incurables, clinics in the South End and West End for preschool children. The West End clinic was turned over to Public Health, later the Visiting Nurses Association in 1927. The pushcart patient library at Albany Medical Hospital. They assisted in the establishment of the Occupational Therapy Department of Albany Medical Hospital, and this period included 2 world wars. In 1940-41, the League established the Albany Children's Theater, which was an outgrowth of its own dramatic committee. In 1941-42, the League established a child care center for working mothers, which received national recognition as the first league to meet the war needs. In the 1940s, the League turned to education of children. The Albany Children's Theater was established as an outgrowth of the Dramatic Committee. Other projects established by the League were the Child Care Center for Working Mothers, which received national recognition as the first league received national recognition. Sponsored children's radio programs, one in conjunction with the Troy and Schenectady Leagues. Instituted remedial reading for institutional children of the Albany Home for Children. In 1952, the League and Rotary co-sponsored the Northeastern Speech Center, which involved Dr. McCumber's group, Easter Seal, State Health Department. The sponsors furnished money, volunteers, and board members. It was a 10-year commitment. I was not a member yet when that was established, but I was later on the Speech Center board, and it was for, at that time, the health, the government, the state, the federal, and were not as involved in providing health service for the needy. And Dr. McCumber came to the board and asked, thought that they should be, that it would be a great service because there were children like with cleft palate. I knew one boy who was treated by them who could not afford the care. They worked by getting funding from the Rotary and us. They also got funds from the state. Each one, a portion was paid for by the health department. The board consisted, there were always 3 members from Rotary, 3 members from the League, and it was a great learning experience, and it was later taken over by the health department. In 1960, the League created an authentic Dutch room of the Albany Institute of History and Art. The grand opening was attended by representatives from Holland and was followed by a dinner at the Executive Mansion, hosted by Governor Rockefeller. That was at the time that Governor Rockefeller's son died in, I think it was a scuba diving accident outside of the Philippines. And that some people from Holland helped to find him, which they did. And in appreciation, Governor Rockefeller had invited them to Albany, and it was at the time of the opening, and it was quite an interesting opening. With it was then Mayor Corning was there at present, and I was fortunate to be treasurer of the operation of the Dutch Room. The Dutch Room was researched by the League. They got authentic, and they worked in cooperation with help from Holland to have, like they got tiles, the authentic tiles, and it was a very interesting project. In 1964, the League helped finance the International Center, which included volunteers and leadership. In 1965, the League made a 3-year commitment to the establishment of the Helderberg Workshop, supplying money, volunteers, and leadership. The Helderberg Workshop held classes in various learning experiences for children. I know that, well, like nature projects and various projects. In 1967, at the request of the Council of Community Services, the League helped establish the Volunteer Bureau, which was a 3-year project. The League had a Volunteer Bureau for itself, but the head of the Council of Community Services came to the League and said, there are all of these programs through that there should be coordination of the volunteers within the group, and so that, and I happened to be treasurer of that, so ended up on the Council of Community Services Board, which was very interesting, particularly at the time they allocate their funds.
And I am doing the 70s through 1980. One of the projects that we had was sponsoring with 13 other community organizations a drug program called Junk, and a video which was called Bobby on drug abuse. And the video was given to any organization that wanted to have a speaker come in and find out a little bit more about what was going on. The League worked on the renovation of the Junior League room at the Tenbrook Mansion. We did the one in the Albany Institute, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. It's not in there. They took it out and used the space for some other project. But the one at the Tenbrook Mansion, we were involved in doing research for the authentic wallpaper, the fabrics, the paint, and the furniture that is in the bedroom as you go upstairs. It's the first bedroom that is on the right. The Volunteer Bureau, again, they worked on helping with 30 other organizations to set up an action center. They were set up all over the United States. They went back in and did some more work with the Volunteer Bureau that Joan was talking about. They co-sponsored with the Rotary Club a bicentennial project for the Tenbrook Mansion in the exterior areas. They cleaned up the grounds all around. There's a fence around that building.
The Tenbrook Mansion, every year, the Junior League gave $500 to the Tenbrook Mansion, and they did not know how to stop giving the $500.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
And because it was a tradition, and nobody wanted to be the one to break the tradition.
They finally did.
They finally did.
But this little project that we were doing, maybe the 500 went to that too. It was cleaning up all the shrubbery and all the things around the fence and making a little path that was a nature trail. And we identified all the trees that were in there, took down the shrubs and the things that were just wild things growing. But the trees, the shrubs, the little wildflowers, all of that were part of that little project. And we had a brochure that we made up, and people would go and volunteer to take school groups around the grounds, which was fun. They funded Project Hope, which was a program for teenage girls who were having family issues, drug problems, and alcohol-related problems, but were too young to be part of Hope House, which is also down in the area where Pembroke Mansion is. So they were trying to do some work with them pre-being admitted to something like the Hope House program. And they came to us and asked if we would give money to this program and some volunteers. So some of us did end up sitting on the Hope House board. They sponsored Moccasins and Wooden Shoes, which was, and I forgot to bring my book with me. I'll have to get it so you can see it sometime. It was a classroom workbook that our members researched, and it had to do with the history of New York State, which studies the Dutch colonial period up and down the Hudson River, and particularly here around the Albany area. It had illustrations, games, poems, writing exercises, you name it, it was in there. And it was a committee of people who were in the league who just were interested in working on it. And we ended up with sending the book itself to all of the libraries and schools up and down the Hudson River. We took a traveling trunk, which was part of the Albany Institute of History and Art and the League, because our members were the ones who took the trunks over there. And they provided us with things that were important to the period and that we would be having in this book. And we went to about 200 schools in the area around here. And there were 2 people who went with the trunk because they needed 2 to carry the trunk and get it in. Took over the 4th grade class for 1 period of the day. We did a lot of things with the Albany Institute of History and Art. I don't know, we were really involved with what they were doing. We did printed a little brochure on walking and bus riding tours in historic areas of Albany. We also worked with them when they wanted to establish what they called the Kid Space, which was in the Harmonis Bleecker Library, which is kind of kitty corner from the Albany Institute of History and Art. What they did in there was a center devoted to art for children, and they offered painting and pottery and storytelling and theater, and members of the league volunteered to be helpers for all the professionals who were coming in, the artists. And we also donated what we had, which was a marionette stage. It was very big, very heavy. We used to take it around to different places and
it was
have
terrific.
to put it together. It was a fabulous thing, but we ended up donating it to the Kid Space because it would then have a permanent home. And this group of league members were people who made the marionettes. One of the members, Joanne Lendon, is the one who carved most of their faces, and they were just fabulous. So we would put on performances for them once a week for most of the year. And there were 3 groups, artistic groups within the league for this period of time and kind of overlapping into some of the others. The marionettes, who did the shows, and many of the people were the same people who were in the group called the Paleteers, Palantirs did painting in hospitals, children's homes, wherever they called and asked us. We did them in the speech center, I think, at one point.
Albany Hospital?
Albany Hospital, St. Peter's Hospital, a lot of places. And we would go in with our little projector and draw the things on the walls and then spend a couple of days painting. And it was a lot of fun because everybody going by would ask us what we were doing, and would you please put a little bird in there? I'd like a bird in there. Or whatever it was they wanted to have. And one of the places that we went, I know, was St. Margaret's Home for Children. And the other group was called the Choral Leaguers. And I'm not a singer, but they were great. And they would perform all over the city and for a lot of our events. Let's see. The League also, during that period of time, took to the community through various organizations volunteer career training, which really tried to go to organizations and teach them how to use volunteers, where they could use them, and how to use them, so that it had some connection with what their organization was doing. A lot of places, like even hospitals, don't know what volunteers can do. You can do anything you want to do if you want to help that organization, but they don't know what to do or how to incorporate you within what they're doing. So we tried to help them learn that, and for the volunteers to learn what to expect. Something that we brought to the community in a number of different ways, and I think it's probably was very useful. Maybe needs to go out there again. Who knows?
And many of those volunteers would go on the board or have leadership positions within the organization.
That's true.
Well, I have 1980 to about 1995, and that decade started out with the development of the Ronald McDonald House, and the Junior League was the catalyst for making that happen, mostly through our president, Barbara Hayne, but there were a lot of Junior League women who chaired various committees in making that house a reality. Next Step Incorporated, a home for alcoholic women to recover. It was an offshoot of the Project Hope that Grace had talked about earlier, but I've got a personal story connected with that. The women would be taken into Next Step to recover from their difficulty with alcohol, and then they were placed in the community. They would go out and get jobs and hopefully be set on a new course for life. So a great example of our success in being able to help some people in the city of Albany. St. Peter's Hospice was something that we worked in. Two of the pieces that we did were promotional pieces. We worked on a brochure, and then later, a few years later, worked on a film about St. Peter's Hospice. We continued our involvement with Kids Space, contributing volunteers to help and some money to help continue that project. Milk for Life is another project that was ongoing for several years. At that point, there were a number of women in the league, myself included, who'd had children, and it turned out that breast milk was something that some children could only live on, but their mothers weren't able to breastfeed them, either because they hadn't realized how important it would have been to their child in the first place, or they couldn't do it. And so it was a small project, but an important project that provided breast milk for infants who were in need of that type of milk. We brought MBO, Management by Objectives, AMP, which I think you've heard about that, have they not? It wasn't long before we were training, and I was one of them. Red Cross, Kidney Foundation, YMCA, all kinds of other organizations and the not-for-profits in the Albany area, and MBO, and then later some other league not-for-profit organizational training. Another thing we did, which probably wouldn't be needed now, was a little book called Going Places. Going Places was a book that listed all the restaurants and other public facilities in the Capital District and their handicap accessibility. And because that was in the days before it was required that all those buildings open to the public be handicap accessible. So that was a project that took everybody, because everybody was given certain restaurants and stores and other places to go and tape measures and to measure restrooms and steps and, you know, a whole page to fill out and all this stuff. But it was a great resource for people in the community until the state finally got their act together and started making sure that all public places were somehow handicap accessible. We had another foray into the Dutch room at the Albany Institute of History and Art because that needed to be updated, so we had a project to do that. We were part of the development of the Regional Food Bank, contributing time, volunteers, money to getting that started. We had an early breast cancer detection project, and then we had a child cancer care project at Albany Medical Center. And then Grace had mentioned the 70s we had a bicentennial. Well, along comes the 80s and our tricentennial for the city of Albany. So out comes Moccasins and Wooden Shoes, the publication that Grace mentioned. We revived that. The tricentennial trunk was put on the road to go and visit area schools instead of the bicentennial trunk. Same idea, just a little bit more stuff, some of it more specifically Albany City. But anyway, we had a float and the Tricentennial Parade, and we also hosted a Fall Family Festival for that. A lot of volunteer effort and time for those sorts of things. We funded a children's library at Parsons School. We were part of a rowing regatta in the city of Albany. Homeless also saw some of our activity. We were part of the development of Swire Residence, which is a homeless shelter in Albany, and we furnished that whole residence and then had on the books to do others as was needed. We were the initiators, I should say League members were the initiators. Later League came into it in a big way. The development of the domestic violence shelter in the city of Albany. Lorraine DeLeo was the catalyst behind that entire project. The Junior League of Albany served on all of the committees in all kinds of various ways to make that a reality. And also there was a woman-to-woman project that followed that. We had various projects helping out the Senior Service Center and also Capitol Repertory Theater. We weren't part of them that beginning of either of those, although there were members who were, but later on there were some needs they had where they needed volunteers to help make their organization more viable, so we were there. We had probably probably about it. It was the beginning of the Done in a Day projects, which you may have heard later on, Done in a Day. The League was transitioning from more women who were working and finding it harder to be involved in the great big projects that while they were lots of fun and wonderful times and busy times for the volunteers, they just didn't have the time for that. So we initiated a Mother's Day food drive, which was the first of the Done in a Day type projects, which I think have been very successful over the years. And then there was the food show. We got that one off the ground, and then we had a rape awareness project with the Troy and Schenectady, was a joint project, the Troy and Schenectady Leagues. That takes us up to
1995. I have to say that, you know, during those active years we were blessed with a very dynamic group of women that did our project research and development committees. I think we were inspired by a lot of the League's past projects, starting Ronald McDonald House, starting Equinox. Our era really wanted to make a difference and make an impact. The first really big project was the Race for the Cure, which a group of women went down to New York and went to Texas and did a tremendous amount of research, spent a lot of time and energy, and was able to get it funded and also get it authorized through the Komen Foundation. We started in 1995, and it's been running for 14 years. The Junior League funded it for about 5 years, and it just became so large that we then turned it over to the community. It raises probably at least $200,000 that goes back into our community here. There is a grants review committee that was started with the league and sat down when we achieved all the money, 25% stayed here, and then they determined where these grants would go. And there's some great projects here in Albany. Albany Med is a recipient, To Life is a recipient, that are doing tremendous things for breast cancer. So we're very proud of that. One of the other big projects, which I know you're all still involved in, is the American Girl event. We started with the Samantha's Ice Cream Social and did a couple different fundraisers. We did Samantha's Ice Cream Social. We introduced the doll Kittredge, if I remember correctly. And then we moved on to the fashion show, which we've been doing, I believe now, for at least 5 years. I've worked on that, worked on the model. So it was a fun project, and it was nice because it is a big event. We ran it for 3 days. It was an opportunity for everyone in the league to work together. So we love that project, and helped us to fund, a lot of our other projects. The second biggest thing, very proud of, is Gilda's Club. And there were 13 women in the league that decided that they really wanted to do this. Gilda Radner had started it in New York City. They spent a lot of time, again, researching it. Very dynamic group of women. They brought it to Albany. They worked diligently with legislators and other community groups to raise $3 million, which they finally did. And when they got to that point, the Junior League then turned it over to Gilda's, and they run themselves now also. But it was a tremendous project. We raised tremendous amounts of money, and it was a great opportunity for people in the community that are touched by cancer. I don't know if any of you have ever been over to Gilda's. Yeah, it's terrific, with the kids' room and the kitchen, and it's also a nice spot to have meetings. Some of the other fun things that happened, and occurred during my time as an active was the Rockwell Scholarship. And that's not really a project, but it was a person from the league that put us in her will, and perpetuates itself, so we were able to start a scholarship for young women in the community, which we still fund.
You ready for funding? And I guess I start off again. From the beginning, the League has raised funds to carry out the projects. Each year, the financial needs of the existing projects have to be met. Some years, there are sufficient funds with the assistance of small League fundraisers. Other times, larger fundraisers are needed involving outside sources, which you've heard some of. In the early 20s, the fundraiser was the 9 o'clock play. I don't know anything about the play, but it must have been a success because it ran, they did it for 3 years straight. Then, in 1924, the League had its first Follies, and there were 3 more in 1955, 1960, and 1967. I don't know whether any of you have heard of the Junior League Follies, but I don't think you could do it today because I think there are too many working people, and because it is they hire, the outfit they had for these was Cargill. They come in with all of the costumes set up. It's a review, musical review. It is 2 weeks of concentrated effort, and they put on a show that is terrific. You find out what talent there is in your group, and people are doing things they never thought they could do. As they say, it brings the group together. Of course, some might not have been speaking to each other after the 2 weeks, but it was always an interesting experience. Then there were rummage sales, cookbooks, assemblies. One I noticed they did in the 20s was they operated the Times Union for a day. I don't know what they did, and I don't know whether the paper got out. But then there was a horse show, square dance. In 1957, the League opened the Next to New shop, which was a major fundraiser. The shop provided a great service to the community, providing good items, at reasonable prices. It also provided volunteer opportunities for the league members, contact with the community, and leadership. It also provided a place to take items no longer needed. I can remember Grace Curry starting a boutique shop down there because I thought it, but I know it is a lot of work, but what I was impressed with was that it did provide a service to the community, and it had clothes. If somebody was needy, they might find the next day that that winter coat that they were looking at and couldn't afford would be set aside, and it had been marked down, but their pride was preserved.
Where was that located, the next to new shop?
It opened in Central Avenue, and then it moved to Madison Avenue, a corner of Lark, Madison, right in that.
But it was an interesting time because not only did you meet someone else who was working with you, because there were always at least 2 people working every shift, plus the woman who was running the building. But you got to, as Joan said, you got to know the people that came in and the funny things that they did and the nice things that they did, and they were always very cheery. During the time that I'm covering, we did still have the tinsel ball every year at the holiday times, and it was always a black tie event. A lot of fun. We had an art sale that the Palletiers did for us, and we had a barn on my husband's family's property in Slingerlands that was falling down, so we asked if we could take all the wood, so we did, and we took one whole side of the barn, which then we painted things all over it, and they ended up with it at Helder Workshop. We donated it to them because who was going to take that home? Nobody. But we painted on all the barn wood, and had a good time, and had a sale at somebody's house, outside sale. We had a tennis exhibition at Siena College, and we had Ron Laver, and I don't have any idea who he played. Cannot remember. But it was, we had a cocktail party, a reception thing beforehand, and then we had the tennis exhibition, and then we had some other things that were going on. So a lot of people from the public came, so we made quite a bit of money from that event. We had boat rides down the Hudson River, nights at the Cahoes Music Hall, and as Joan mentioned, we brought in Accents, which was a boutique which we had in this building on Madison Avenue, and it was a women's exchange, which is a national organization that provides locations for women to bring their products and sell them. It's like a special consignment shop. So we went around and researched that, and then we opened one across from the next new shop. And it had really nice things, but we did learn that it's very hard for people mentally to go into a next to new shop and spend their money and figure out how much they want to spend and walk across the hallway and go into a boutique where you really have to get more than 2 cents for whatever you got in there. So we mentally, that is very hard to do. It's like going to outlet stores and then suddenly going into a regular store, because your mind just doesn't want to switch. So anyway, that was fun, and that was just another little thing that we had.
Okay.
They're on.
Yeah. Into the 80s. Well, into the 80s, we still had the shop. And it was, at that point, it was all in the Madison Avenue building. And there was a lot of transition in the shop about that time, because I think the 80s was a time, think about it, it's when the big transition from women who were more stay-at-home went to majority of the women who were working. So fewer and fewer women were actually able to do all 6 or 8 shifts that you were required to do. So no matter what your economic straits were, you could dress yourself for $1 if you needed to. Is basically the way it was. And And in 1984, we celebrated our 25th year at the shop. Like I said, it was all there in the, on the Madison Avenue building. Accents continued, but the problem that Grace addressed is one that eventually forced us to close it. Because it was hard to bring in the customers to that building who were going to buy things in Accents, the boutique, because they probably weren't going to walk across the hall, and vice versa. So eventually we decided that we would close it, and we did in the early 80s. Another fundraiser we had, which went for a while, quite a while actually, it's still kind of going on, Stenciled Strawberry Cookbook. 1983 that got started. And everybody, not everybody, but everybody who wanted to could send in recipes. Recipes were then sent out. Every one of those recipes was tested in 2 different households to see how they were, and then probably tested again. There was a lot of work that went into that cookbook. It was a very, very well done cookbook, and it was a good fundraiser for us. A couple little fundraisers for us. One was stationery sales, and another one was called Capital Wrap. We had a woman design wrapping paper that was white background with black buildings, and the black buildings were outlines of the various important buildings in the city of Albany. Empire State Plaza, the Capitol, our own Junior League building, just all kinds of buildings around Albany that people would identify. And that sold for a few years before we finally stopped that one. We had 2 art auctions, big art auctions, a couple of silent auctions. These weren't the little kind that you go to a cocktail party to. These were, again, big silent auctions. Macy's Days, where you go in and Macy's will give you a percentage if you have a ticket and things like that. We had that, and also Mystery Shopper at Stuyvesant Plaza. That went for a few years. And then Junior League of Albany really stepped out of the box. Stepped way, way out of their comfort zone when I was president. And we had the real Western Rodeo and Country Days at the Altamont Fair. And it was a real rodeo. I am not kidding. Bulldogging, riding the bronc and broncs. And it was 3 days, and maybe I'll address that later when we make our personal comments. But it was quite the fundraiser. Okay.
All right, so I have 1995 to present. I know we talked about the Samantha's and American Girls event, which continues to be a major fundraiser. We also had the Rick Charette concerts, which we did at the Egg, and he was a entertainer that was geared towards children, which we had a lot of success with, and everyone loved Rick Charette when we did it. We also had started the Holiday House when Marjorie Rockwell Doyle, who is our Rockwell Scholarship, passed away. We had the house that they were working on, and we were able to host our first Holiday House. So we had local decorators come in, similar to a show house, like a Vanguard show house, except for decorated for the holiday. We continued. We had a couple house donations over the years, and we continued that for, I think, up until 1998. So we had a nice run. We also continued with Mystery Shopper, Mother's Day Project,